That Father's Day morning, sunlight slipped softly through the curtains as I sat alone, savoring my coffee. When the doorbell rang, I felt a quiet curiosity. Opening the door, I found Melissa standing there, her smile practiced and hesitant. She handed me a small, ornate box wrapped with care, its intricate design gleaming with surprising sharpness against the simple backdrop of our home. I accepted it without hesitation, the weight of the box oddly heavy in my hands, not physically, but something more burdensome. Her words of love and appreciation fell flat, rehearsed like lines from a play long forgotten by its actors. As Melissa stepped back onto the porch, I caught a flicker of disdain in her husband's knowing smirk, a silent mockery that seemed to reduce the whole scene to a hollow performance. I closed the door carefully, my fingers tightening around the box as unease settled in. Maria watched me from the kitchen, her eyes sharp beneath a furrowed brow. "Can't you see?" she whispered, her voice low and burdened with years of quiet understanding. The question struck me with unexpected force. What was I missing? Looking again at the gift, the patterns and polish seemed less beautiful and more mocking. Underneath the surface shimmer, I felt the cold bite of indifference wrapped in the guise of affection. Maria's steady gaze reflected sorrow she could no longer hide. She knew then, as I began to, that this was no simple act of kindness. It was a pretense, a mask draped over years of disrespect and neglect. I sank back into my chair, the box resting in my lap, its emptiness that of a gesture void of meaning. The room, once warm with shared memories and laughter, now felt constricted and distant, shadows stretching where light had faded. I thought of the invisible toll, the long hours spent to save for Melissa's education, the sacrifices made silently, the dreams once nourished with hope, now flattened beneath the weight of entitlement and disregard. Melissa's smiles had grown thin, her respect superficial and strained. Today's gift was the final crack in a facade I had held together far too long. Maria's whispered caution haunted me as I stepped away from the family gathering, a quiet observer cloaked in invisible pain. The chatter and forced smiles felt like echoes in a hollow chamber. The ornate box was not just a present, it was a symbol of betrayal, the breaking of bonds that should have been strong, the fading of gratitude into something unrecognizable. The afternoon light waned as I withdrew into silence, weighed down not by material loss, but by the loss of dignity and love. The truth had taken a harsh form. Beneath the surface of family warmth lay arrogance and ingratitude, cold and unforgiving. Yet amid the pain, a quiet, resolute ember kindled within me, not yet fully realized, but gathering strength to shape the path ahead. Still holding the ornate box, I slipped quietly away to my study, a small room filled with relics of a life once focused on logic and order. The familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood surrounded me, offering a cold comfort amid the storm that had engulfed my thoughts. I settled into the heavy leather chair, the one that had witnessed nights of meticulous work and restless contemplation, and allowed my mind to drift back to the years of sacrifice and silent devotion. I remembered the long, grinding hours spent as an electrical engineer, working projects late into the night. Every bolt and circuit I drew, every calculation poured over in exhaustion was driven by a single goal: to provide a stable, secure future for my family. I had often set aside my own desires, believing that hardship now would mean comfort and opportunity later. When Melissa's college costs arose, it was no surprise to me that I would have to tighten my belt even further. There were nights I skipped meals just to ensure tuition checks were paid on time. I reached into savings, forewent vacations, and took on side projects to make certain Melissa would have the education I never did. The house we lived in stood as a monument to those years. I had watched years unfold in its walls, each nail hammered with hope, each brick a silent promise of safety and belonging. The house, once alive with laughter and warmth, now felt strangely sterile, as if the very foundation had been hollowed out by the creeping shadow of disregard. I thought of the times when Maria and I would sit by the fire, envisioning a future bright with family and legacy. That vision seemed a cruel joke now, smashed beneath the weight of cold smiles and muffled contempt. Melissa's presence, once radiant with youthful ambition, had twisted into something harder, sharper, edges that cut beneath the surface. Her smiles were no longer genuine, but rehearsed. Her gestures measured by what might be gained rather than genuine affection. The ornate box I held became a cruel symbol, not of love or gratitude, but of the facade she and her husband wore so well. It was a mask hiding years of neglect and calculated distance. Maria's warning came back to me with clarity. The gentle but piercing, "Can't you see?" It was a question loaded with years of watching me sacrifice, of seeing the invisible cracks that grew wider with each passing year. She had known long before I did that the gratitude I sought was never truly there. The realization was agonizing. I had been blind, or perhaps in denial, clinging to the idea that love and respect were owed to me simply for my efforts. The weight of that truth pressed down with brutal finality. I thought of all the nights guiding Melissa through her applications, the countless calls to universities, the silent prayers made in the dark. Each sacrifice felt repaid only in entitlement and casual dismissiveness. I, who had always tried to protect and provide, was now invisible, no more than an obstacle or a bank account to be managed. The ornate box, once seeming a beautiful offering, now felt like a slap, a hollow token wrapped in false sentiment. Its intricate designs gleamed with cold beauty, mocking the years of loyalty and love I had poured into this family. The contrast couldn't be starker. What I had given freely was met with calculated disdain. I found myself sinking deeper into a mix of sorrow and quiet fury. The fragile threads of connection, once so woven with care, were fraying beyond repair. Yet, beneath the hurt, something firmer began to take root. This was no longer simply pain, it was resolve. The years of patience, of swallowed pride, were forging in me a new kind of strength. I drew on what I knew best: discipline, analysis, and planning. My mind, trained to dissect complex systems and expose weaknesses, began turning inward, toward the family's facade and the hidden fractures beneath it. The skills honed over decades in engineering, the careful measurement of cause and effect, became tools for understanding the betrayal laid bare. Sitting there in the quiet study, the ornate box unopened before me, I let myself imagine the possibilities ahead. Not fueled by rage or bitterness, but by cold calculation. The path forward would be deliberate, measured, built on the knowledge and experience I had cultivated over a lifetime. I would no longer be a passive victim of arrogance and ingratitude. The house, the family, the legacy, all had been shaped by my hands. If they sought to diminish me, I would fight back, not with reckless vengeance, but with the precision and patience that defined me. This was my moment to reclaim what had been eroded, to restore not only my dignity, but balance and justice. As dusk settled around the house, I felt a flicker of clarity ignite amid the shadows. The ornate box was both a symbol of betrayal and a catalyst, a reminder of what had been lost and the urgency of what must be regained. Despite the ache of disappointment, or perhaps because of it, I found within myself a quiet determination, the first steady ember in a fire waiting to blaze. There was no turning back. I would harness the skills of a lifetime, the careful observation, the thorough analysis, the unwavering patience, and begin anew. The sacrifices of the past would not be in vain. They would be the foundation on which I built a new reality, a new justice. In this stillness, surrounded by the echoes of my own labor and love, I understood that the strength to move forward had always been inside me. The years had shaped not just loss, but resilience. The path was mine now to walk, slow and deliberate, but unyielding. I set the box gently aside and rose from my chair, the resolve firm in my bones. The next chapter would begin on my terms. The days that followed were shrouded in a quiet tension, a subtle war waged beneath polite gestures and carefully chosen words. I moved through the house with a measured calm, masking the storm that churned beneath my skin. The ornate box remained untouched, a silent specter reminding me of the fracture that now defined my relationship with Melissa and her husband. I devoted myself to observing, listening, piecing together what had been hidden in plain sight for too long. One afternoon, as I sat by the window tracing lines on a pad of paper, a slip of paper fluttered to the floor from Melissa's purse as she passed by. It was a document, barely glanced at, but the sharp eye of an engineer saw more than she intended to reveal. It contained figures, transactions, notes about the house, and mentions of freezing accounts. Words that sent a sudden cold spike up my spine. That's when the veil lifted. They intended to cut me out, to erase my presence and influence quietly, legally, with calculated precision. The betrayal was deeper than I had dared to imagine. I folded the paper carefully and waited, letting their actions reveal themselves in full. I overheard hushed conversations between Melissa and her husband, the plans to marginalize me. Discussions about legal maneuvers designed to restrict my access to the family home and finances. Each whispered word was a blow, but instead of anger, I felt a cold, steady resolve settle within. This was their last insult, the line crossed that demanded I shift gears, from hurt and confusion to strategy and action. My years as an electrical engineer taught me to recognize systems, both mechanical and human, and to find the weak points hidden beneath complexity. Now I applied that mindset rigorously to the tangled web that had become my family. I began to analyze their moves like a schematic, mapping out their plans and identifying the vulnerabilities they overlooked. This was no longer a matter of feeling wronged, it was a problem to be solved with patience and precision. I contemplated their arrogance, how they underestimated not only my resolve, but the depth of my knowledge and connections. They believed me passive, vulnerable, a man whose best years were behind him. But they had forgotten the lessons that shaped me. Slow, steady pressure breaks the strongest materials, and meticulous planning leaves no room for error. I began to think like a strategist, contemplating the first moves in this delicate game. If they sought to freeze my accounts, the first step would be to understand the transactions, track the flows of money, and uncover any irregularities they might have overlooked to secure their position. If legal control of the home was the objective, I would need to examine the documents, deeds, and any contracts, looking for cracks, oversights, or the slightest misstep to exploit. I allowed the emotions to recede, focusing instead on the facts, the structures, the cold calculus necessary to outmaneuver their ambitions. Each plan had layers, contingencies, variations, and safe exits. Failure was not an option, and I would not be caught unprepared. The patience and precision of my engineering days served me now, sharpening my senses and steadying my nerves. At night, I pored over financial statements and legal papers Maria had quietly collected over the years, cross-referencing them with public records. Days blended into nights as I reconstructed a picture of Melissa and her husband's ventures, their debts and involvements. I uncovered a web far more tangled and precarious than I had realized. Unpaid loans, shaky business deals, overstretched assets, weak points hidden beneath polished fronts. I reached out discreetly to old friends, men and women who understood the language of finance and law. James, a retired bank manager I once mentored, was among the first to answer my call. His response was measured but supportive, offering insight and guidance in matters that had been obscured by greed and deception. I knew I would need their help, skilled allies who could read the fine print and anticipate countermoves. With every discovery, my strategy gained clarity. This was not a desperate dance, but a calculated campaign, methodical and deliberate. I devised maneuvers to halt unauthorized payments and protect vital assets. If necessary, I would expose their fraudulent practices, with evidence so undeniable it would unravel their carefully constructed facade. I would challenge ownership claims legally, turning their own arrogance against them. I felt a surge of empowerment as I planned these moves, the cold fire of retribution kindling behind the calm exterior. They had underestimated me, mistaking decades of patience for weakness. But it was that very patience, that lifelong habit of reading complex systems, that made me their equal, or perhaps their superior. I watched them closely, noting their increasing frustration as their control slipped slightly through their fingers. Their attempts to intimidate or provoke me were met with measured silence and a steady gaze. Each failed effort only tightened the web of their anxiety, while I remained an unshakable presence, unmoved and unyielding. In these moments, I realized how much I had longed for this clarity, the release from silent suffering, the chance to reclaim agency. The transformation was not sudden, but a gradual awakening of purpose rooted in experience, intelligence, and an unshakable will. This was not mere vengeance, it was justice, a restoration of balance and respect that had been denied for too long. The path ahead was still fraught, but no longer obscured by doubt or despair. I was ready for the battle to come, armed with knowledge, resolve, and the steady hand of the engineer who knew how to build and to break when necessary. I immersed myself fully in the painstaking task of uncovering every thread of deceit that Melissa and her husband had woven around me. The quiet rhythm of my days transformed into a deliberate investigation, a meticulous, almost surgical process, exposing layers of financial mismanagement and hidden agendas that had always lurked beneath the surface, concealed by arrogance and calculated stubbornness. Every morning began with a survey of the papers Maria carefully brought me, stacks of bills, legal notices, bank statements, and letters I had long forgotten or was never meant to see. I scanned each line with the precision of a trained engineer, eyes trained to catch anomalies in a sea of data. Uncovered beneath those innocuous documents were unauthorized transactions siphoning money in increments designed to go unnoticed, subtle shifts in ownership of assets, and proposals for liens against properties I had built and maintained over decades. This was no haphazard greed. It was a systematic attempt to sever me from everything I had worked so hard to protect. The house, the bank accounts, the investments, each was being targeted in calculated moves designed to isolate me financially and emotionally. The brazenness left a bitter taste, but also fanned a cold, hard fire deep within. A fire stoked not by impulse or anger, but by years of patient preparation. Maria's support, unwavering yet discreet, was a lifeline in this endeavor. Her sharp wit caught details I might have missed, the tone of a passing conversation, the hue of a letter seal that hinted at trouble. She nudged me gently to reach out to friends from my past, those with the experience and influence needed to confront this quiet coup. Her faith reminded me I was far from alone, and that the years we'd spent building a life together had forged more than just a home. They had built networks and alliances that could be rekindled. It was James, the retired bank manager I'd once guided, who answered my summons first. His calm, deliberate voice became a steady beacon through the storm of deception. Together, we sifted through transactions, piecing together a landscape of financial betrayal concealed beneath corporate jargon and falsehoods. Months of clandestine maneuvers were revealed in charcoal sketches of unauthorized loans taken out in my name, assets shifted without my consent, and creditors kept in the dark about the true state of affairs. These revelations solidified the backbone of my strategy. Legal channels, I knew, would be my primary battlefield. But we were not dealing with amateurs. Melissa and her husband had sought counsel savvy enough to navigate the murkiness of family finance law. Their paperwork was layered, complex, intended to delay. confuse, or outright deny my claims. Thus began the work of untangling their carefully constructed web. I retained a lawyer whose reputation for steadfastness was matched only by her detail-oriented mind. We scrutinized every deed, every contract, every claim they'd lodged to exclude me, looking for errors, oversights, and vulnerabilities. Their aborted attempt to freeze my accounts was thwarted by a timely injunction. Their motion to claim sole ownership of the family estate was stalled by clauses vague enough for challenge. We found technicalities often overlooked by less experienced counsel, and we pounced on them. The slow, deliberate pace of litigation exasperated them, but I welcomed it. Time was my ally, not just because I was patient, but because each delay allowed more cracks to form in their facade. I used those pauses to advance other lines of attack, probing their precarious business affairs. There I found deeper vulnerabilities, a tangled mess of unpaid debts, financially overextended ventures, and partners beginning to balk at their instability. Secret conversations with disgruntled creditors and former business associates brought new dimensions to my efforts. Many owed loyalty to James's former bank or harbored grudges over unpaid dues. These allies were ready to tip the balance, providing crucial testimony or refusing to honor agreements that could save my adversaries from bankruptcy. Just as I evaluated electrical circuits for weak points, I mapped these relationships, pinpointing where pressure could break their grip. Outside the bureaucracy of paperwork, the household simmered with tension. Melissa's cold glances were sharpened with frustration, her smiles thinner, her words clipped with impatience. Her husband's veiled threats and haughty dismissal became less frequent but more desperate. They attempted to goad me out of my quiet defense, hoping to provoke missteps I could ill afford. I remained an unyielding rock. Every comment, every insinuation was met with a calm that unnerved them more than any heated retort would have. The transformation within me surprised me, too, a reservoir of strength uncovered in the silence of my resolve. I drew from years of experience, intelligence, and the relentless grace of an engineer solving for the unknown. In the evenings, Maria and I shared quiet moments, sometimes over a cup of tea, sometimes in companionable silence. She reminded me gently of the far-reaching stakes. Beyond money or possessions, this was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting what it meant to be family when blood was marred with betrayal. Her presence grounded me, a steady reminder that this campaign was about justice, not vengeance. With each passing week, our campaign tightened. Assets were frozen, fraudulent statements exposed, and legal claims challenged successfully. Every victory, no matter how small, chipped away at the veneer of control Melissa and her husband had constructed. Their business partners grew wary, contracts slipped through their fingers, and creditors grew impatient with the spiraling chaos. I moved deliberately, never reckless. I balanced prosecution with prudence, knowing the dangers of overreach. Every legal filing, every public exposure of fraud was timed and crafted to maximize effect and minimize backlash. This was no wild tempest. This was an engineer storm, powerful, controlled, and unyielding. As I watched their growing desperation, their schemes unraveling under scrutiny, a quiet satisfaction filled me, not from malice, but from the restitution of balance. I was no longer the disregarded patriarch. I was the architect of my own restoration. There were still battles ahead. The path was long and fraught with complexities, but uncertainty had given way to confidence. This fight was mine to lead, held steady by decades of discipline, intellect, and the unwavering principle that justice, once denied, could be reclaimed, not with fury and haste, but with patience and precision. The days lengthened and shortened around me, the world outside continuing unaware of the quiet war waged within these walls and courtrooms. Each move, each step was calculated, deliberate, bit by bit, piece by piece, restoring what was lost. The victory I sought was no longer a distant flicker. It was a steady flame burning brighter with every effort. And as I prepared for the next phase of this campaign, I found within myself a calm certainty. Justice was coming, slow but inevitable, like the turning of gears long frozen, beginning once more to move. When the time came to execute the first phase of my plan, I approached it with the same calm precision that had carried me through decades as an engineer. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no bluster or weaponized words. Instead, I moved quietly but decisively, like a well-oiled machine set in motion. Every cog turning to dismantle the grip Melissa and her husband held over our family's legacy. It began with the freezing of key financial accounts, a direct but silent strike. I coordinated with my lawyer in James, ensuring all legal paperwork was airtight, free from loopholes they might exploit. The court orders arrived discreetly, sudden enough to catch them off guard without raising alarms beyond what was necessary. When Melissa learned of the freeze, her surprise was penniless posture. The shock rippled through her like an electric current. I watched from a distance as chaos slowly unspooled behind the polished facade she maintained so well. The furious phone calls, the whispered urgency in impromptu meetings, the frantic attempts to plead or negotiate, they all exposed the cracks hidden beneath her smug demeanor. Her husband's bluster was no match for the quiet rigidity I projected. Their efforts to intimidate me, to question or unsettle, dissolved into thin air against my unwavering silence. Throughout this, I maintained my composure with deliberate care. Each interaction was a chess move, measured and purposeful. When Melissa confronted me directly, her voice a hard edge of accusation, I met it with calm eyes and controlled words. She sought to provoke a reaction, an opening to undermine me, but I was steadfast. The fire she hoped to ignite within me met nothing but a cold, reflective surface. Their panic became palpably physical, visible in hurried meetings and strained conversations with shaky business partners. The balance of power, once unquestioned, began tilting. Creditors grew impatient and wary, contracts fell through, and their grand designs started dissolving into chaos. It was astonishing to witness the rapid unraveling precipitated by moves they had never foreseen. While I tightened my hold on the financial front, I also began to gather documentation to support formal legal challenges to their claims over property and business interests. What once seemed looming threats crystallized into open confrontations in court. I had prepared for this phase with meticulous care. My lawyer and I presented evidence so thorough and compelling that attempts to deflect or dismiss crumbled beneath the weight of truth. The court hearings were tense, quiet battles of wills that extended over several weeks. Melissa and her husband appeared confident at first, armed with their layers of influence and financial clout. But their assured smirks faded as each piece of forged document, each misrepresented transaction was laid bare. The judge's eyes, keen and experienced, uncovered the fraud beneath their claims. I remained composed, watching the scales gradually tip. Behind the courtroom drama, the home itself became a battlefield of silent hostilities. Melissa's growing disdain was no longer veiled. Preserve the original language of the text, conversations I was part of. Her husband's eyes frequently darted away, avoiding the weight of my gaze. Even Maria, quiet and reserved, noted the subtle shifts in their behavior, the shrinking respect once afforded to me. Despite these tensions, I maintained my outward calm, knowing that my strength lay not in aggression but in steady presence. I refused to be a man pushed aside by vain entitlement. Each small victory in court or behind closed doors, each halted payment or exposed deception, was a brick in the wall I built to protect my dignity and rights. Their attempts to unsettle me intensified in the quiet moments, thinly veiled warnings, pointed remarks from their friends, and a few confrontational visits from lawyers trying to intimidate me. But these efforts only hardened my resolve. They underestimated the depth of my patience and the rigor of my preparation. I met each attempt with silence, letting their panic grow while I held steady. In my quieter moments, I reflected on the transformation within me. The man who once yielded silently to betrayal had become one who wielded control not through force but through relentless strategy and clarity of purpose. My engineering mind, which once constructed circuits and systems, now meticulously operated in the complex human one, dismantling their schemes with calculated precision. The family dinner, held not long after the initial freezes, was a stark theater of tension. Voices were subdued, smiles tight and forced. Melissa's gaze was sharp, yet avoided direct contact. Her husband remained tense, his usual bravado diminished as I quietly asserted my renewed position. Yet even in this charged atmosphere, I said nothing unnecessary. The silence itself was my message, calm fortitude unshaken by their theatrics. Despite the cyclone I had stirred, I chose to preserve what little remained of civility, not out of weakness, but as a tactical decision. I knew that dignity was as potent a weapon as any legal document or financial freeze. The battle was far from over, but the momentum was mine. I was no longer overwhelmed by the tumultuous waves of betrayal. I was the steady tide reshaping the shore. The weeks following that dinner saw more maneuvers executed in the shadows. I worked with my allies to solidify injunctions, preventing further unauthorized asset movements, while preparing for the complex legal battles ahead. My carefully constructed network of contacts grew, aided by long-standing relationships resurrected when I needed them the most. Each victory bolstered my confidence, yet I remained vigilant. I knew that they might regroup, that new schemes could arise in desperation. So I balanced assertiveness with caution, readiness with patience. My goal wasn't destruction, but restoration. To reclaim not just money and property, but the respect and justice I had been denied. The strain was immense, on Maria, on me, on what remained of the family dynamic. Yet even amid the personal cost, I felt a profound sense of purpose, steadier and stronger than any frustration or grief. I was no longer the passive victim. I had become the decisive force shaping my fate. As this phase of the campaign unfolded, I understood that victory was not a single event, but a process, a series of deliberate actions accumulating over time. Each positive outcome, whether freezing an account, winning a court decision, or thwarting their calculated attempts to sideline me, was a step toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I was in the thick of a long battle, measured by patience and powered by knowledge. The quiet moments of reflection fueled the sharper moments of action. And through it all, I remained unmoved, not driven by anger or desperation, but by the unwavering conviction that justice, however delayed, would prevail. The scales were balancing now, slowly but surely. And as I prepared for the next phases, the first true sense of hope in years took hold. The architect of a life betrayed was rebuilding with deliberate care, reconstructing not just finances or status, but the very foundations of dignity and respect. Justice was not a grand spectacle. It was a careful, calculated crescendo. And I, steady and unyielding, was conducting the symphony that would restore what had been lost. The morning of the final hearing dawned quietly, the world outside seemingly unaware of the battle ready to be fought at the heart of our fractured family. I arrived at the courthouse not with the tumult of emotion I had once imagined, but with a steady calm forged through months of preparation, patience, and resolve. The weight I carried was not just the documents and evidence I held, but the burden of years of betrayal demanding redress. Melissa was already there when I entered the austere courtroom, her posture rigid, lips pressed thin, a mask of defiance fraying at the edges. Her husband, once brash and confident, seemed smaller now,
shadows under his eyes, and tension in the way he shifted in his seat. Their plan, once so boldly laid, was crumbling beneath us all, exposed by the careful unraveling of truth I had orchestrated. The proceedings started with the presentation of evidence, a catalogue of their deceit meticulously compiled through countless hours spent navigating the labyrinth of financial records, contracts, and testimonies. My lawyer spoke clearly, each word unmasking another layer of their fabrications, forged signatures, hidden transfers of assets, and unauthorized attempts to sever my ownership and control of what was rightfully mine. I sat back, watching as the courtroom absorbed the weight of proof no amount of charm or bravado could deflect. Witnesses, once silent or intimidated, now testified with clear voices. Accountants who saw irregularities, creditors left unpaid,
and experts who detailed the financial chaos they had wrought in the name of entitlement. It was as if a dam had broken, unleashing a flood of truth that no defense could contain. Throughout the days that followed, I remained composed, my experience guiding me through each exchange, each cross-examination. Despite the emotional turmoil beneath the surface, I projected an image of unwavering strength. I had walked this path long enough to understand that rage and desperation only cloud judgment. What I needed now was clarity, precision, and an iron will. Melissa's sharp gaze occasionally sought mine across the courtroom, a silent challenge met with my steady return stare. Her confidence seemed to waver with each piece of discredited testimony and refuted claim. Her husband shifted uneasily, the cracks in their facade widening as the truth became undeniable. The judge presided with a calm authority that neither side could sway. Each misstep, each omission in their defense was noted, weighed against the balanced scales of justice I was determined to support. In quiet moments, I felt the energy of the courtroom, a mingling of tension, revelation, and slow vindication, as the story of betrayal was laid bare for all to see. Outside the courtroom, transformation unfolded more subtly. The once brash and dismissive glances Melissa cast toward me softened into wary acknowledgement. Her husband's protests ceased, replaced by a muted acceptance I had rarely seen before. The foundation of control they had tried to cement began to dissolve beneath their feet. Back home, Maria and I navigated the aftermath with a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. The family home, a space that once echoed with warmth and refuge, carried now the quiet scars of division and conflict. Yet within these walls there was a reclamation, a subtle but profound restoration of dignity and calm. I often caught myself reflecting on the long years that had led to this moment, the sacrifices made in silence, the weight of patience stretched to its limits, and the cold resolve that finally crystallized into action. The ornate box Melissa had once given me, a symbol of false affection and grievance, sat unopened on a shelf, a reminder of both the pain endured and the journey toward justice. This victory was not born from fury, but from a calculated, unwavering persistence. I realized that some wounds, especially those inflicted by family, do not heal entirely. Forgiveness, where it exists, is tentative, a fragile bridge over a river widened by neglect and entitlement. Yet I found solace not in perfect restoration of broken bonds, but in the reclamation of my place, my rights, and above all, my peace. As the court's final decisions were read, confirming my legal standing and undoing the attempts to erase me, a profound sense of closure settled over me. I was no longer the outsider, the usurped patriarch. I had become the architect of my own redemption. In quieter moments, away from the public eye, I contemplated the future that lay ahead. The relationship with Melissa and her husband would never as it once was, perhaps not even truly repaired. But the foundation I now stood upon was built of respect earned through resilience and wisdom, not blind submission or complacency. Every challenge ahead could be met with the confidence that comes from having faced the darkest hours and emerged victorious. The restoration was not merely of assets or titles, but of a deeper self-respect long eroded. I had weathered the storm of familial betrayal and emerged tempered. The intricate symphony of justice, painstakingly conducted with patience and intellect, had reached its crescendo. The house, the legacy, and my dignity were mine once more, a testament to the enduring power of steadfast resolve. And as I looked toward the horizon of my life, I held a quiet certainty. Justice, though often delayed and hard-won, is an unyielding force. It is not measured in grand gestures, but in the steady accumulation of truth, courage, and unwavering purpose. This was my moment, not of anger, but of triumph. The road behind was rugged, but the path ahead, although uncertain, stretched before me with clarity. I would walk it slowly, deliberately, guided by the unwavering conviction that the true measure of justice is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of perseverance. In reclaiming my rightful place, I found not only victory but peace. The peace of a man who had, after a lifetime, finally been heard, recognized, and restored. The house settled into a quieter rhythm, the echoes of conflict fading into distant memories. I moved through rooms that bore the marks of our long struggle, walls that had witnessed silent tensions, conversations held in guarded tones, but now held a calmer presence, a tentative peace. The air felt lighter, carrying the subtle warmth of resolution rather than cold suspicion. Maria and I found solace in the small moments reclaimed. Shared meals undisturbed by calculated snubs, evenings spent reading side by side, and the simple comfort of companionship unburdened by heavy secrets. Though the wounds between our family members would likely never fully mend, and the space between Melissa and me remained vast, there was a new respect rooted in hard-learned lessons and quiet acceptance. The bitterness, so long simmering beneath the surface, had begun to fade. Melissa's absence, or rather the emotional distance that remained, was a persistent ache. I understood, now, that love strained and broken by neglect and entitlement could not simply be restored by legal victories or demands. Respect, like trust, must grow slowly, nurtured by consistent actions rather than forced confrontation. Their silence was a stark reminder of what had been lost, but also a call to focus on what I could rebuild for myself. In these quieter days, I often reflected on the personal cost of my journey. It had not been just a battle for assets or status. It had been a fight for my own sense of self-worth and dignity. The sacrifices made, the missed family gatherings, the silent endurance, the tireless work still echoed in my mind. But I faced forward, carrying the knowledge that my value was not diminished by their disregard or entitlement. I had emerged from the shadows of betrayal tempered and transformed. The patience once born of obligation had ripened into a quiet strength, one that would guide me through the years yet to come. Where once I might have responded with fury, I now met challenges with an unwavering calm born of experience and reflection. The future, though uncertain and marked by the scars of past wounds, held a new promise. Relationships might remain strained, and some bridges possibly too damaged to cross, but there was a foundation upon which I could stand firmly. My place in the family, in my own life, was no longer defined by their neglect, but by my steadfast determination to claim my dignity and peace. I found renewed purpose in the simple rituals of daily life. The garden where I once found quiet solace now flourished alongside the steady growth of my resolve. Moments once stolen by doubt gave way to plans, smaller, quieter dreams that were mine and mine alone to nurture. In reclaiming my home, I had reclaimed the freedom to live with integrity. The ornate box Melissa had given me, a symbol of false affection and betrayal, sat unopened, a reminder of the journey from pain to empowerment. It no longer held the sting of deception, but the mark of a turning point, a catalyst for the justice I had forged through patience and perseverance. As the evenings grew still, I often sat by the window, watching the world move steadily forward. The steady pulse of life outside mirrored the newfound steadiness within, a calm acceptance that justice is not a sudden blaze, but a slow-burning fire, sustained by courage and unyielding resolve. In the quiet moments, I acknowledged the truth that had become clear. Justice cannot erase the past, but it can reclaim the present and shape the future. It is measured not in vengeance, but in the resilience to endure, the clarity to act wisely, and the strength to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I was no longer defined by the chains of betrayal or neglect. Instead, I was the architect of a life restored, a life marked by dignity, quiet strength, and the unwavering belief that, even amid broken family ties, personal justice remains a force no one can take away. This was my victory, not loud or boastful, but profound and lasting. A testament to the power of perseverance, the value of patience, and the unshakable truth that standing firm in one's worth is the greatest justice of all. In reclaiming my rightful place, I found what I had sought for so long, not only the restoration of home and honor, but the peace of a man finally heard, respected, and restored to himself.